The shrill ring of Margaret Peterson's voice cut through the peaceful Saturday morning like a chainsaw through butter. Standing on her perfectly manicured lawn in Whispering Pines Estates, she jabbed her finger accusingly at the navy blue sedan parked across the street. "I've called the police. This vehicle has been here for 3 days. 3 days, violating our 48-hour street parking ordinance," she announced to the small crowd of neighbors who had gathered, drawn by the commotion. Her platinum blonde bob remained perfectly still despite her animated gestures. Shellacked into submission with half a can of hairspray. Officer Jenkins, a young cop who looked barely old enough to drive, shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, are you certain it hasn't moved? Sometimes people park in the same spot after driving elsewhere." Margaret's eyes narrowed dangerously. "I have photographic evidence." She thrust her phone toward him, displaying a series of time-stamped photos of the offending vehicle. Same position, same tire alignment, same everything. "I know cars, officer. My husband was in automotive sales for 30 years before he escaped," she caught herself, "before he passed away." At 57, Margaret Peterson had transformed from grieving widow to HOA board president with alarming efficiency. The transition had been her salvation after Harold's death 3 years ago, giving her purpose and, more importantly, authority. As president of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association, she wielded the community bylaws like a medieval knight wielded a broadsword, with extreme prejudice and questionable accuracy. Officer Jenkins examined the photos. "I'll have to write a report, but this is really more of a civil matter between the homeowner and the HOA." "Civil matter?" Margaret's voice rose an octave. "This is a safety issue. Emergency vehicles need clear access. What if there's a fire? What if someone needs an ambulance? Every minute counts in an emergency." From across the street, a door opened, and a tall man with salt and pepper hair emerged from the house in front of which the sedan was parked. He approached with unhurried strides, a coffee mug in hand. "Morning, officer," he said pleasantly. "Is there a problem?" Margaret whirled around, her face flushed with righteous indignation. "Your guest has been parking illegally for days. This officer is about to issue a citation." The man raised an eyebrow. "My guest? Don't play dumb." Margaret snapped. "This vehicle doesn't belong to any resident. I know every car in this neighborhood." The man smiled slowly. "Actually, that's my new car. I just bought it last week." "Impossible." Margaret pulled out her phone again, scrolling frantically. "You drive a red Audi. I have it documented right here in my resident vehicle spreadsheet." Several neighbors exchanged glances. The existence of Margaret's resident vehicle spreadsheet was news to them. "I still have the Audi," the man said calmly. "This is my second car. The bylaws clearly state," Margaret began, but the man cut her off, "that each residence is allowed 2 vehicles per household. Section 7, paragraph 3. He sipped his coffee. "I should know. I helped write those bylaws when I moved here 5 years ago." Officer Jenkins cleared his throat. "Sir, could I see your registration, just to clear this up?" "Of course." The man reached into his pocket and produced his wallet, extracting a business card instead of a registration. He handed it to the officer. "But this might be more relevant." Officer Jenkins' eyes widened as he read the card. "Chief Daniel Lawrence, Metropolitan Traffic Division." Margaret's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water as the revelation sank in. She'd had just called the police on the city's traffic chief. Monday morning found Margaret pacing her living room, phone pressed to her ear. The previous day's humiliation had not dissipated. If anything, it had crystallized into something harder and more brittle. "I don't care if he's the traffic chief, Barbara," she hissed into her phone. "Rules are rules. The HOA is a separate governing body with its own authority." On the other end, Barbara Winters, the HOA's secretary and Margaret's reluctant ally, sighed audibly. "Maggie, maybe we should let this one go. Chief Lawrence is well respected in the community, and technically he's not violating any bylaws." "That's not the point." Margaret's free hand clenched and unclenched. "He embarrassed me in front of the entire neighborhood. Do you know what Diane Cooper said to me at the mailboxes this morning? She asked if I'd arrested any innocent cars lately. They're all laughing at me, Barbara. The incident had spread through Whispering Pines like wildfire, becoming instant neighborhood folklore. Margaret Peterson, HOA tyrant, finally overplaying her hand. The thought made her stomach churn. I'm calling an emergency HOA meeting for tonight, Margaret declared. We need to clarify the parking regulations. On a Monday, people have plans, Maggie. You need to give proper notice. This is notice. 7 p.m. sharp. Make the calls. Margaret hung up before Barbara could protest further. She moved to her home office, a spare bedroom converted into command central for HOA operations. 3 filing cabinets lined one wall, containing meticulously organized records of every violation notice, every paint color approval, every architectural modification request since she'd taken office. She pulled out the community bylaws, a 3-inch thick binder that she knew almost by heart. There had to be something she'd missed, some technicality she could exploit. Chief Lawrence might think he was untouchable, but no one was beyond the reach of properly documented covenant enforcement. At precisely 7:00 p.m., Margaret called the emergency meeting to order in the community clubhouse. The turnout was larger than usual. News of the confrontation had drawn residents who normally avoided HOA meetings like the plague. As you all know, we're facing increasing disregard for our parking regulations, Margaret began, avoiding direct mention of the weekend's incident. I propose we amend Section 7 to require registration of all vehicles with the HOA board, including photographs, make, model, color, and license plate numbers. The room erupted in protests. That's an invasion of privacy. Who's going to manage that database? This is still about Chief Lawrence's car, isn't it? Margaret rapped her gavel sharply. Order. This is about community standards, not any individual incident. From the back of the room, a voice cut through the noise. Actually, I think it's very much about an individual incident. The crowd parted as Chief Lawrence walked toward the front. The same measured pace as before, the same infuriating calm. Chief Lawrence, Margaret acknowledged stiffly. You're not on the agenda to speak. As a homeowner, I have the right to address the board during any open meeting, he replied. And I'd like to ask a simple question. What is the real purpose of these regulations? Safety and order or control? The room fell silent. Margaret felt heat rising in her cheeks. How dare you question my motives? I've dedicated 3 years of my life to maintaining the standards of this community. Property values have increased 12% under my leadership. Chief Lawrence nodded. And at what cost to the community itself? My department receives more complaints about aggressive enforcement from this HOA than any other in the city. The revelation sent a ripple through the crowd. Margaret felt the ground shifting beneath her. This wasn't just about a parking violation anymore. This was an open challenge to her authority, her purpose. Everything she'd built since Harold died. She didn't notice her hands were shaking until her gavel clattered to the floor. The new HOA elections were scheduled for the last Saturday in May, giving candidates 4 weeks to campaign. Margaret surprised everyone, including herself, by deciding not to run. Instead, she threw her considerable organizational energy into revising the community bylaws before her term ended. These amendments would significantly reduce the board's enforcement powers, Barbara noted as they sat at Margaret's dining room table, reviewing the proposed changes. Are you sure about this? Margaret nodded, adjusting her reading glasses. The purpose of a community association should be to build community, not just protect property values. I lost sight of that somewhere along the way. Barbara studied her friend with open curiosity. What changed, Maggie? And don't tell me it was just the Lawrence situation. Something else happened. Margaret was silent for a long moment, her fingers tracing the edge of the bylaws binder. I found Harold's journals. He kept them in his desk at the station, and Chief Lawrence brought them to me. Harold wrote about his vision for retirement, the garden he wanted to plant, the trips we'd take, the volunteer work we'd do together. Her voice caught. Not once did he mention me becoming the neighborhood warden. She'd spent 3 nights reading the journals, crying over the future they'd lost, and the way she'd filled that void with rigid rules and petty power. The Margaret that Harold had loved, spontaneous, passionate about community theater, quick to laugh, had disappeared after his death. The woman who replaced her was organized and efficient, but hollow. The following week, Margaret did something she hadn't done in 3 years. She attended the community garden club as a participant, not as the overseer. She arrived with seedlings and no agenda, volunteering to help with the children's section of the garden. "You're good with them," Diane Cooper remarked, watching Margaret patiently demonstrate to a 5-year-old how to measure the proper distance between tomato plants. "I taught kindergarten for 12 years before switching to school administration," Margaret replied. "I'd forgotten how much I enjoyed it." Whispers still followed her through the neighborhood, and not everyone was quick to forget the years of violation notices and confrontations. But slowly, tentatively, Margaret began rebuilding connections, volunteering at the community center, offering her administrative expertise to the local food bank, attending Chief Lawrence's monthly community safety workshops. At one such workshop, Lawrence approached her after the presentation on home security. "I have a proposition for you, Miss Peterson." "Margaret, please," she corrected him. "What kind of proposition?" "The city is establishing a community mediation program to handle minor disputes without involving courts or law enforcement. We need organized, detail-oriented volunteers who understand both rules and people." He handed her a brochure. "Harold would have been perfect for it. I think you might be too." She examined the brochure carefully. "You're not worried I'll be too rigid? Too controlling?" Lawrence smiled. "Actually, I'm counting on your thoroughness. But I've seen how you've been changing. Growth isn't about erasing who you were. It's about expanding who you can become." On the day of the HOA elections, Margaret arrived early to help set up the clubhouse. The leading candidate, a retired school counselor named Thomas Williams, approached her with obvious trepidation. "Ms. Peterson, I wanted to thank you for the transitional documents you prepared. They're incredibly comprehensive." Margaret smiled. "Call me Margaret, please, and you're welcome. I've also prepared some notes on what I believe were my biggest mistakes as president. Learn from them or ignore them, your choice." Williams looked surprised. "That's uncommonly generous." "Not really," she replied. "It's just good community stewardship." As residents filtered in to cast their votes, Margaret found herself standing next to Chief Lawrence near the refreshment table. "Not having second thoughts about running?" he asked. She shook her head. "No. It's time for new leadership. Besides, I've enrolled in a master gardening program, and I'm helping start a community theater group. My schedule's quite full." "Harold would be proud," Lawrence said quietly. "I think he'd be surprised," Margaret countered. "But yes, eventually proud." After the votes were counted and Williams was declared the new president, Margaret slipped out of the clubhouse. She walked slowly through the neighborhood, noting the blooming gardens and children playing on lawns, things she'd seen before, but never truly noticed, too focused on violations and compliance. As she passed Lawrence's house, she saw the navy blue Impala in the driveway, now sporting a fresh wax job and vintage license plates. Richard Lawrence sat in a chair beside it, enjoying the evening air. He waved her over. "Danny tells me you're quite the organizational wizard. I've been trying to catalog all my old car photos and memorabilia for the grandkids, but I'm making a mess of it. Any interest in lending an old man a hand?" Margaret hesitated only briefly before changing course and heading up his driveway. "I think I can help with that. I happen to have some free time these days." "Excellent." Richard's face lit up. "Fair warning, there are decades of stories that come with those photos." "That's all right," Margaret said, settling into the chair beside him. "I'm learning to appreciate a good story." Across the street, her empty house waited, its perfect lawn and regulation paint color a testament to order and rules. But for the first time in 3 years, Margaret was in no hurry to return to it. The warm evening air, the promise of stories, and the unexpected gift of connection held her firmly in the present moment, a place she intended to stay. The following Monday, Margaret awoke to the sound of engines, multiple engines, outside her house. She peered through her bedroom curtains to see 5 cars parked along the street, with people gathered around Chief Lawrence's driveway across the way. Curiosity overcoming her reluctance to show her face in public, Margaret dressed quickly and ventured outside. As she approached Lawrence's property, she recognized the vehicles from her surveillance notes. Up close, she could now see they were all different years and models of the same make, Chevrolet Impalas. Chief Lawrence stood in his driveway beside an elderly man who bore a striking resemblance to him. The older man was beaming as he ran his hand along the hood of the navy blue sedan that had started all the trouble. "Morning, Ms. Peterson," Lawrence called, seemingly unsurprised by her appearance. "I'd like you to meet my father, Richard Lawrence." "Dad, this is my neighbor, Margaret Peterson." The older man extended a weathered hand. "Pleasure to meet you. Danny's told me about the parking situation." His eyes twinkled with amusement rather than judgment. Margaret shook his hand automatically, confusion evident on her face. "I don't understand. What's happening here?" "It's Dad's birthday," Chief Lawrence explained. "He collected Impalas his whole life, had to sell them when he moved into assisted living last year. So my siblings and I tracked down 5 of his favorites as a surprise. We've been restoring them in secret for months, storing them at my house temporarily until today." Margaret looked at the gathered cars with new eyes. Now she could see the family resemblance between the other people present. Lawrence's siblings, she presumed. They were watching her warily. "The cars coming and going," she began. "My brother and sisters bringing their pieces of the puzzle," Lawrence confirmed. "We each took responsibility for finding and restoring one model. The blue sedan was mine, a 1967, Dad's first car when he was 18. Richard Lawrence patted the blue sedan affectionately. "Never thought I'd see her again." Danny even found the original upholstery pattern. A profound embarrassment washed over Margaret, different from the angry humiliation of the past week. This was deeper, tinged with shame and regret. The mysterious car operation she'd been so certain was nefarious had been nothing more than a family working together on an act of love. I misunderstood the situation completely," she admitted, the words difficult but necessary. Chief Lawrence studied her for a moment. "We all make assumptions based on incomplete information, Miss Peterson. The question is what we do when we learn the truth." An uncomfortable silence fell. One of Lawrence's sisters whispered something to him, but he shook his head slightly. "Would you like to join us for coffee and birthday cake?" Richard Lawrence asked suddenly. "Danny's youngest made it herself. She's quite the baker." The unexpected kindness cracked something in Margaret's carefully maintained facade. "I wouldn't want to intrude on a family celebration." "Nonsense," the older man insisted. "Any friend of Danny's is welcome." She didn't correct his assumption that she and Chief Lawrence were friends. Instead, she found herself following the family into the house she'd surveilled so excessively just days before. Lawrence's home was warm and lived in, with framed photos covering most available surfaces. Many showed him in uniform at various ceremonies. Others captured family gatherings spanning decades. It was the home of someone with deep connections, the exact opposite of her own pristine, impersonal house. As she accepted a slice of lopsided chocolate cake from a beaming 10-year-old girl, Margaret caught sight of a photo on the mantel. It showed a much younger Lawrence standing beside a patrol car, and next to him was a familiar face, Harold. "That's my late husband," she said, moving closer to the photo. Lawrence followed her gaze. "Harold was my field training officer when I joined the force. Best mentor I ever had. Taught me that law enforcement is about helping people, not just enforcing rules. He talked about you all the time, you know. He was so proud of your organizational skills, your attention to detail." The fork in Margaret's hand trembled slightly. "He never told me he trained you. Harold kept work and home separate, but he did tell me once that the secret to his happy marriage was understanding that sometimes people channel their care into control, where they're scared of losing what matters to them." Margaret stared at Harold's face in the photograph, seeing in it a connection to her present she never could have imagined. All this time, she'd been living across the street from a piece of her husband's legacy. Margaret canceled the Wednesday garden committee meeting, something she'd never done before. Instead, she sat in her car across from the community entrance, a pair of binoculars on the passenger seat and a notepad in her lap. If Chief Lawrence wanted war, she would give him war, a war of documentation. Every car that entered or exited Whispering Pines was logged with military precision. Time, description, license plate when visible. She was particularly interested in Chief Lawrence's vehicles, both the Audi and the offending Navy sedan. The man was up to something. She could feel it in her bones. By mid-afternoon, her bladder protesting and her stomach growling, Margaret had compiled a curious pattern. The blue sedan had left at 7:15 am, presumably with Lawrence headed to work. But since then, 4 different cars had entered the community and parked at his house. A red compact at 9:30, a white SUV at 11:45, a black luxury sedan at 1:20, and most recently, a gray pickup truck. "Gotcha," Margaret whispered, snapping photos with her phone's zoom lens. The HOA bylaws explicitly prohibited running businesses from residential properties, and whatever Lawrence was doing with this parade of vehicles certainly qualified. Her momentary triumph deflated when a patrol car pulled alongside her. The window rolled down to reveal Officer Jenkins, the same young cop from Saturday's confrontation. "Afternoon, Ms. Peterson. Everything okay out here? We received a call about a suspicious vehicle conducting surveillance." Margaret straightened indignantly. "I'm the HOA president monitoring covenant compliance. That's hardly suspicious." Officer Jenkins glanced at her binoculars and notepad. "Ma'am, several residents have expressed concerns about feeling watched. I'm going to have to ask you to move along." "Who complained? Was it Lawrence? He's running some kind of illegal car operation from his home. I have evidence." She thrust her notepad toward the officer. "Ma'am, I'm not here about Chief Lawrence. I'm here because your behavior is making people uncomfortable." His voice was gentle but firm. "Maybe it would be best if you went home." Humiliation burned through her for the second time in 5 days. As she started her car, she glimpsed Barbara Winters watching from the community entrance, phone in hand. The betrayal stung sharper than she expected. At home, Margaret poured herself a glass of Chardonnay, her first drink before 5 o'clock since Harold's funeral. Her house felt emptier than usual, the silence pressing in from all sides. She wandered from room to room, touching surfaces as if to confirm they were real. In the hallway, she paused at a framed photo of herself and Harold, taken on their 30th anniversary cruise. "You would have handled this better," she told his smiling image. Harold had been the diplomatic one, smoothing over her occasionally abrasive manner with his easy charm. Her phone chimed with a text message notification. "Barbara, emergency board meeting called by Vice President Taylor. 8 p.m. tonight. Your presence requested." Margaret stared at the message in disbelief. James Taylor, the spineless vice president who had never so much as suggested a motion in 3 years, had called a meeting without consulting her. The coup was underway. She arrived at the clubhouse 5 minutes early to find it already packed. The 6 board members, including Barbara and James, sat at the front table looking grim. Chief Lawrence was nowhere to be seen. "What is the meaning of this?" Margaret demanded as she approached the board table. James Taylor cleared his throat. "Margaret, please take a seat. We need to discuss recent events and their impact on the community. If this is about my investigation, it's about a pattern of behavior," James interrupted with uncharacteristic firmness. "We've received a petition signed by 68% of homeowners expressing concerns about the current HOA leadership." Barbara slid a document across the table. "They're calling for new elections, Maggie. There's nothing we can do. The bylaws are clear on this point." Margaret felt the room tilt slightly. 68%. More than 2/3 of her neighbors wanted her gone. She'd known there were malcontents, people who bristled at proper enforcement, but she'd never imagined the dissatisfaction ran so deep. "This is Lawrence's doing," she said, but the accusation sounded hollow even to her own ears. Actually, a new voice interjected, Chief Lawrence was one of the few who didn't sign. Margaret turned to see Diane Cooper, her next-door neighbor and longtime adversary in matters of appropriate holiday decorations. "He said everyone deserves a second chance," Diane continued. "Even you, Margaret."